This is the Ignorant Conversations podcast, basically a conversation between two morons who like to think they know things that they don't know about. We're going to be discussing books, and we're going to alternate between the books we read every week. I'm going to start the first week, talk about the book I read. He's going to ask me questions, and we're just going to take it from there. Right?
Yeah, sounds about right. Let's do it. Let's get to it.
All right, let's get to it. So, I read a book called Fevre Dream, Fever spelled Fevre, Dream, by
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin, who is, I suppose everybody knows him for Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones. But actually, why I was interested in reading this book in the first place is because I read his novellas, which are also set in the Song of Ice and Fire universe, but they're not a part of the main Game of Thrones series. And what I noticed was that his writing is much better when he's not talking about Game of Thrones related stuff.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, the tone of the novellas are different. They're much more lighthearted, and I felt like, here's what I think. I feel like this guy is he started this project wanting to do it, but over time, I don't think he wants to do it anymore. But he has
I think
to.
it's because of the expectations fans have. Like
Yeah.
that's what they're on him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's taking a really long time just to, finish his next book. I really think he doesn't want to do it. He wants to do other things. I mean, it's evident. He keeps writing other stuff, like the history books of like Game of Thrones or World of Ice and Fire or something like that. I don't know. I haven't read them. But what I noticed was that, when he kind of just changes the tone, he kind of writes whatever he wants to write. I felt like he was just a better author. I mean, the quality of the books, in my opinion, in the main Game of Thrones books, they were kind of going down with each book. Anyway, so I started reading this book, and apparently it's one of his earlier books, and it's about.
Is this before? Was it like had he written this prior to that?
Yeah, this is before. This is one of his earlier books, I think. Basically, the book is about vampires on steamboats in the 1870s, South USA.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting setting. That's why. I mean, I'm not like a big fan of vampire.
Or steamboats. I imagine.
Well, what's wrong with steamboats? They're pretty cool, man. I mean,
Wait, what do you mean by steamboats? Like boats that use steam engines? Like, is that what it means?
Yeah, they burn coal or whatever and use the steam to. They have these big wheels on the side or in the back at the back.
Yeah, okay, I got what you're talking about now.
Yeah. It's about those things.
All right.
Yeah. So basically, that's the main premise of the book, and just like it's not your typical. What I liked about it is because look, this whole vampire thing. I think the Twilight books kind of really put a dent in the public perception of vampire stories. It just kind of became this young adult / corny teenager, fathom. But it's not that. I mean, if you read like Dracula, the original story,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it has a little bit more substance to it. So what I liked about this book, it does play a role with the classic vampire stories and borrows from that a little bit and kind of twists it. I mean, what I can relate it to is, are you familiar with the Witcher stuff?
Only through the Netflix series. I haven't read the books.
All right, that's fine. But what I'm gonna say is, like, in the Witcher stories, and I don't know, I haven't watched the Netflix series, but at least in the books and the game, what happens is they like to play on misconceptions people have about like monsters or creatures or whatever, and just kind of play, like, have a twist on them. For example, there's this one character in The Witcher, and he's a vampire, and they start asking him questions like, "Yo, what's up with the whole garlic thing? Right? Is it true that you guys you know, are scared of garlic or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he's like, no, actually, there was this one guy, there was this one vampire, and he was, eating, like, hunting a lot of humans and drinking their blood and whatnot. And like one time, he noticed that he went into a house and there was a lot of garlic in there. I'm paraphrasing, by the way, so I might be wrong, but it went something like this. And he ate he drank the blood of that human, and it tasted great because of all the garlic that was laying around. So what happened was he purposefully spread a rumor that garlic is like drives us away.
Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's just like seasoning. He tricked everybody to season the food in a way.
Wait, so is this how George R. R. Martin writes it, or is this from The Witcher?
This is from The Witcher, but it has similar elements in the sense like there's an idea of vampires in the world in that
Yeah.
Fever Dream world, and the guy, the steamboat owner, the steamboat pilot, I guess,
Hmm.
captain. Yeah, he's a captain. His name is Abner Marsh, and
What's
how
his
this
name?
Abner Marsh,
Oh, okay.
right? So the story is like this: this guy, he's had like some misfortune of late. His Like there was some winter and all of his steamboats got messed up. So this mysterious man that only hangs around during the night by the name of Joshua York. He's like, hey, I have money and I want to own a steamboat. We can do business together. You'll be the captain and I'll be the one funding everything. I'll be with you. I would also love to own a steamboat. My only thing is, you don't ask about my business. You don't ask about my habits because I have some weird habits. You just do your captain stuff, and I'll be there. But just don't, mind your own business. And it's like, all right, deal. And this is how the story starts,
Yeah.
right? Joshua York, the vampire, Abner Marsh, basically the main character of the book.
Hmm.
Now, I suppose we shouldn't really go over the whole storyline. I mean, that's gonna take a long time, right?
Yeah. Just give us what you loved about it, like, and how it's different from, what we've come to expect from George R. R. Martin.
All right, yeah. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is the unprofessionalism we were talking about earlier. Okay, so the main themes of this book, because it's set in Confederate States / Southern USA before the Civil War, there's a lot of parallels between slavery and vampires in the book.
As
So
in the way their vampires are treated at that time.
no, in the sense that the main vampire guy, let's just call him the good vampire.
Yeah.
His name is Joshua York, who becomes Abner Marsh's friend.
Right.
He is for integration of between vampires and humans. Because what had happened was he had grown up around humans, and the biggest issue that vampires have is what he calls the red thirst, which is once in a month or something, kind of like a werewolf, I guess, but not really.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything related with the moon. They have this like incredible urge to drink blood. Okay, so this guy had grown up around humans, and every month he would just get the red thirst and he would become completely irrational and he would kill a human being and feel horrible afterwards. He would feel really bad. And he tried a lot of things to stop it, failed many times, but in the end he was successful in making like a drink, a potion. And if you
Made
drink that, sorry?
is it like made from animal blood or something? Like, is it a substitute for human blood?
Exactly. It's basically a combination of stuff that he experimented on, and if you drink that, you don't get the red thirst.
Wait, I got a question though.
Yeah.
I was wondering. So the vampires, right? This is in the age of slavery and during Confederate
Right.
states existing. So
Right.
vampires, were they predominantly of a specific race?
They're described as being really pale, white.
White? Yeah. Do you think there's some like metaphoric, like there's some symbolism there?
I don't really think so because he discusses the origin of vampires, like where they started,
Yeah,
and he kind of discusses like the Russia or maybe slash Eastern Europe area a little bit. So I think he was just hinting that the first vampires were kind of from that region, which is I guess a
yeah.
callback to like Dracula or something.
Wait, so in this book, how does one become a vampire?
They just reproduce.
Oh, really? There's no like biting and then letting go and something
Mm,
along those
No,
lines.
no, no. There's nothing like that. Actually, that's a good question because what in the book, a big issue is that there's not many vampires left,
Hmm. Okay.
and Joshua York is like, uh, I want vampires to integrate with the human beings, and I want every vampire to drink this potion, this drink that I have.
Yeah.
He talks about like the history and how because of this red thirst, they're always lagging behind human beings. I mean they're apparently older than human beings, but since they were created, let's say, human beings, they started civilizations, cities, and vampires are just kind of like hanging in the background, drinking blood and killing people. So he's talking about how we haven't progressed, we have to integrate, uh, get rid of this red thirst. It's kind of like the elves. There was also a similar thing with elves in fantasy.
Else in which book?
Well, I
Like in
mean, in general, there's a fantasy trope that elves are like older creatures. They live for very, very long periods of time.
yeah,
Vampires are immortal in the
and they're
story.
expert at like mining and craftsmanship. And if you truly
That's
want something to kill the evil being that should not be named, you must get, an elfin sword or an elfin hammer.
yeah, yeah. Our actually dwarves too. Dwarves are like the
Oh,
master
yeah.
craftsmen.
It's something to do with like the ability to create something monumentally strong is inversely related with how short you are.
Yeah.
That's
That
the
is
trope
true.
I'm hearing.
That is true.
Yeah.
Imagine like a what's the politically correct term for a human dwarf?
A little person.
A little person.
Yeah.
I mean, why little, man? They're all persons. They're all
No,
people.
but you gotta think it like that. Like it's. I think it's sort of like how sometimes. I don't know. This is this is the correct way to say it. It's just sometimes you meet people who are short, who are much more charismatic and funny than a
Mhm.
lot of people who are tall. And I think it's just because the way it works in our society, in our world, is that your height, like the taller you are, it's seen something as like it's considered more handsome or like
Right.
takes
Yeah.
it easier to you. Like I read this study once that said they did a height survey of all the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and it turns out that on average the CEOs of these companies were about 6 inch taller than the average American. So it kind of
Hmm.
shows that we as people sort of like respect height, or like we give leeway because we think they're more commanding or more charismatic simply because of their stature. So I think that when somebody's short, they have to compensate for that lack of privilege, let's say, that's associated with height. And you have to come up
Right.
with things like you got to be more charismatic, you got to be funnier, you got to be more entrepreneurial because you got to make up for that loss.
Right.
If you're really short, like a dwarf, the only
Yeah.
thing that really worked was coming up with these like monumentally strong like items that would be required by these tall heroes.
You see,
So
but that's the messed up part though. Dwarves are like different species. I mean, you have it bad, man. Now, even the dwarves are gonna be like, dude, you're not like one of us. Like, get
that's
out of
fair.
here.
That's fair.
Yeah,
Hey,
because they
man,
like live longer.
that's just the politics of height in the medieval, fairy tale land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, walk us through like the climax or like, I don't know, the key like tension points and
Right,
the rest.
right. So here's the thing. Now, this guy's for integration, and
Yeah,
then I'm gonna introduce this other character. His name is Julian, or yeah, Damon Julian or something. So let's just call him
yeah,
Julian. Julian in York. Okay, York's the good guy. Julian's the bad guy. Julian is like oldest time, I guess. He's really, really old. and he doesn't want integration. So, long story short, at one point, what happens is York gets Julian and his vampire buddies, and he gets them on the steamboat, and he's like, "All right." The steamboat is called Fever Dream, by the way. It's there's a Fever River apparently where Marsh is from, so Marsh named it after the river, and he called it Fever Dream.
That's a sweet name, actually.
Yeah, and actually it fits really, really well with the what happens to the steamboat, which I will get to. So they got on a boat and they have this really interesting conversation. So York gives them all the drink, you know, and he says, "All right, no more red thirst. We're gonna integrate, blah 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 blah." And then Julian goes on a rant of sorts, and he talks about how for Vamp, he talks to Abner Marsh. He says, "Look, Abner, when you eat a steak or a cow or a sheep or whatever, I mean, you just look at it as food. You don't think of it as anything else. It's like the natural order of things. You don't feel bad for it. It's just food for you." Similarly, that's why vampires, apparently it's a common thing, vampires call human beings cattle. He says this is no different. For me, you're a cattle. You're my food. I don't feel bad when I eat. The parallel is, as far as I can see, with the slavery situation,
Yeah.
is we can equate Julian to slave owners, true
Yeah.
racists, right?
Yeah.
As far as they're concerned, the black people were inferior, kind of something not even human. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's only natural for them to enslave them and put them to work or put them to use as they see fit. So, York loses that battle, and he is forced to abide by Julian's ideas. There's like this blood thing going on. If two vampires can face off, and if you lose, you got to do whatever the other guy says. Like this is your kind of your obligation, your duty,
So
basically.
is that done like that obligation? They ensure that someone follows through that due to honor, or is that like magic that you have to like you?
What happens is they do like a stare down. If you put it simply like that, it's a stare down. They just look at each other's eyes. But it's not as simple as that because how these vampires work is they're incredibly charismatic and they can influence the way a person thinks. So much so that if you hang around them a lot and they're really strong vampires, they can just convince you to give them their blood and you wouldn't even object to it. You would think, yes, this is what I have to do. This is the good thing. This is the right thing. So there's kind of like this mental control / battle going on.
Yeah.
And if you win that, you will become the blood master, as they call it, and you have to offer your own blood, the loser,
Yeah.
and the other guy drinks it, and so he becomes the blood master. Okay,
Julian wins this battle.
Julian wins it, and he wins it more than once. It happens a few times along the story, but yeah, he does. One thing I'd like to note out, by the way, is that in one part there's a description of New Orleans, and I love that description. It talks about how beautiful it is on the outside, but kind of there's something rotten on the inside. I mean, you have all these beautiful houses, beautiful streets, right? Beautiful people, I guess. You know, rich sounds, spices, money. But something feels incredibly wrong inside. Something feels incredibly rotten. Uh, I think I felt that for people sometimes. You know, you meet a person and they're maybe attractive, good looking, or charismatic, or whatever, but you kind of just have this really bad feeling when you're around them. Kind of like a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm following you.
Yeah, and I just love that description. I mean, and the thing is, gut feelings can be very important, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, sometimes what do you call it? It's sort of like instinct.
it is. It's like a It's like a evolutionary trait, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was thinking the same.
Right? Like your ancestors, they felt something was wrong, and they kind of just like they just had this bad feeling for some reason.
Yeah,
I guess which is caused by what? Like there's some subconscious analysis of like the environment, and it causes this bad feeling reaction. And if they follow through, they leave. Maybe there's danger, maybe there's not. But if there is, they live. But if a guy doesn't have that, and just ignores it, walks into the
yeah,
danger, gets killed. Survival of the fittest type thing, right?
fair enough. Yeah, it paid to be risk averse, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I had that. That description of New Orleans was great.
And he describes it like perfectly. It captures that the essence in such a way that you felt like as if you
Yes,
were there and you felt that feeling as well.
I did exactly. It
I
went
mean, he's
into
a phenomenal writer. Even in like I've only read the first four books of A Song of Fire and Ice,
mm,
but as opposed to the Game of Thrones show, I really, really enjoyed the books.
they're amazing. They're really
Yeah,
nice. Yeah, and some people don't like his writing style too much, but I find it great.
why is that? Because it's detailed, or is this too much world building?
Well, I mean, look, you can't hate somebody's writing style for world building, right? That's like not in the writing itself. That's like a part of his structure.
Yeah,
But
fair enough.
how he writes it is something else, right? There's this other like writers, fantasy writers, maybe Patrick Rothfuss. I think I discussed it with you a little bit. I hate the story. It's just how he writes it is so well. It's so flowery and you know uses pretty language.
That's a skill on its own.
That's a skill. Look, I respect that. I admire that. But like, god damn,
That's
man.
almost kind of what we're trying here, isn't it?
I swear to God. Except we don't even have flowery language. You don't have anything going for us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Anyway, back to the story.
Yeah.
All right. Back to the
Yeah,
goddamn
wrap
story.
it up for us now.
Oh
Let's get
no, there's.
to the end.
So Julian, it turns out he's old as hell. Okay, he's really,
Yeah.
really old. In fact, he's so old that he's outgrown the red thirst. He doesn't even feel it anymore. But he still does what he does. Kind of like it's like an identity crisis,
Right.
right? I mean, you've been doing something for so long, and now you don't need to. You don't have to do it anymore. He just kind of feels like he has to. I mean, and he in the book it describes, for example, York reads a lot of books and newspaper and whatever and whatever. And Julian has a big library, but he doesn't read. He just sits there in the dark and doesn't do anything at all. Doesn't even think. And
Man needs some
York,
friends.
I mean, the thing is, he has had friends. This guy is like thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah. But he's just
He's
seen it done it all.
he's seen and done it all. And York says, I think he wants death. He wants death. He wants an end. But the problem is, I mean, and he voluntarily in the book he makes decisions that puts him in danger. And he's a very smart person, and yet he makes those decisions. For example, he keeps Abner Marsh on the steamboat once he takes over Julian. And everybody knows that's a stupid mistake because Abner's like a very resilient guy, brave, and described as very ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we can get demonetized for that, but he's described as one ugly man. Some people call him the ugliest man on the river.
I
Yeah,
bet.
he's like this big fat guy,
Yeah.
and he has like warts on his face.
Yeah.
His nose is like imagine if somebody like his nose looks like imagine if you ran full speed nose first into a wall and his nose just kind of got like flattened. Yeah. Anyway. So, where was I? Yeah, so this guy wants death, but what happens is every time he puts himself in a situation where death might happen, his survival instinct kicks in. He's like this old beast kind of rises again, and just kind of gets him out of the situation. So he's in this loop of trying to kill himself, but whenever he gets close, he doesn't let it happen.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I mean, again, let's compare this with the slavery idea. If Julian is a slave master, right, represents slave masters.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And, I mean, you got to think about it. Yes, they were racist and horrible people, but they were human beings. One of them, at least, one slave master in history must have felt like what I'm doing is wrong.
Yeah,
Right?
but I guess the financial gain was too much for him to.
Yeah. Or just kind of not being a slave master suddenly anymore
Yeah.
is kind of like, well, then what am I? Am I going to be accepted by everybody else? Am I
Right.
going to be? I mean, imagine if Julian just said, "Hey, I don't have the red thirst anymore. I'm all good, man." Well, the other vampires who still have it, / the other people who still own slaves and want to own slaves,
Yeah.
they're going to be like, "Well, what the hell are you? You're no different from those northern Yankees or something." You get what I'm saying?
No different than these other vegan vampires. That's really what it must be. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being like a 10,000-year-old vampire just going for your meal? And then like this freshly turned vampire comes up to you and he's like, think about their feelings. You're snatching away baby.
That's exactly it. York is the biggest hipster of all time.
Right? Yeah.
York is like the first and he's like the epitome of a hipster vampire. Think about your feelings, man. Let's all get together, man, and make love, man. Not war. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Oh man, I gotta eat.
I'm wondering something. So like, you gave a fair analysis of. I don't know if we should call it fair. Like nothing to say against you, but just our
I attempted at an analysis.
Yeah, of like the book itself,
right?
The time it was set in, and also George R.R. Martin's writing style in that book. And we've spoiled a fair bit, but I'm thinking if like that's sufficient, should we discuss it any further? Because our time is running out, or should we wrap it up?
I think there's more to be said, but
is there more to be heard?
Oh, no, man, that's a matter of philosophy, my friend. I can't answer that.
No.
Well, one thing I would like to point out, I think, is the name of the steamboat, Fevre Dream, and what happens to it. Now, Abner Marsh has this obsession. There's this really big steamboat called the Eclipse, and the steamboats used to race apparently. And by the way, if anybody decides to read this book, you learn quite a bit about steamboats.
That's definitely a plus.
Yeah, that is definitely a plus. What I learned was apparently, these guys race, and if you're like playing a racing game or something, you have like the nitro. You click that, and it just kind of gives you a boost.
Yeah, steamboats like that.
Yeah, apparently they use lard. I swear to God, they have tubs of lard.
Is that historically accurate? Or is that fiction?
I think it's historically accurate. I mean, it makes sense. It burns faster or whatnot. You put like fat in there. It's very interesting. Anyway, so he has a dream of one day making this boat, and he does it, and he's like, I'm going to race the eclipse, and I'm going to beat the eclipse. And this is like, he constantly repeats that, how he's going to race it and beat it. And also, that's on Abner's side. For York, he describes vampires as, because they don't have death, they don't die, they're immortal. Their means of survival, kind of is the way they live, is they feast on life, because they don't have a life of their own. I mean, they don't have death, therefore they don't have life. Julian, he describes quite frequently how it's not just any blood you drink. I mean, he takes the youngest possible, right? The one that is full of life and full of life ahead of him or her. And that is what makes it better. That's what he strives on. And York says because he doesn't have a life of his own, right? He lives on that,
Yeah.
and how everything they do results in death, right? And because of their red thirst, somebody has to die. Now, York says that he wants to create something beautiful, not destroy it, not take it, as Julian does, and that's his idea of the way he perceives Fever Dream. Okay,
Yeah.
is the creation of something beautiful, something full of life that does not result in death.
And that's the main schism between the two in the story.
Yeah. So and Abner is that's his dream boat. He wants to race the Eclipse. Now the race between Fever Dream and Eclipse never happens, and Fever
Oh,
Dream as a boat kind of ends up, well, not in very good place. It ends up very poorly. Let's just put it like that.
yeah.
So I like how the name Fever Dream, like ideas of their perception of the steamboat is an actual fever dream, right?
Right.
I mean, he never races the boat and gets the glory of winning the race, and
Yeah.
I suppose York
You
could
haven't
never.
mentioned that though, because up till that point, you'd given only enough away of the book that I was interested in reading it. But
Mhm.
now that I know that the race never gets fulfilled, it's too much to
It's
begin to read. All right, so and it sounds like quite the book, to be honest. And I wonder though, in the beginning that you mentioned that because of the Twilight Saga, there's a certain, say, like a certain stereotype that we've come to expect from vampire stories and movies of the sort. And I wonder if
Mhm.
reading this book will sort of cleanse that vampire stereotype palette, so to speak. So, I mean, I'm interested in reading it, but I don't know if I will because I think I know too much of the book. But nonetheless, it sounds quite nice.
Overall, great story. The characters are very well written, in my opinion. There's lots of layers to it. I love the descriptions. Love the themes. Love the setting. Love the twists. Um, that's all a plus. The minuses, maybe some parts, some bits can feel a little bit much, especially regarding the descriptions of steamboats. I mean,
A
you,
little drawn out then.
yeah. I mean, look, you learn quite a bit, and it functions well as it kind of puts you there,
Yeah,
and you really understand the way Abner Marsh's mind works, and at some parts it is incredibly well written, like the way he looks at certain steamboats and how it looks good to him, and some
right.
don't. That's really good. But some bits is like when it's written objectively, like as the steamboat is like let's say, well, it doesn't walk, it doesn't stroll, going down the river.
Yeah, I got.
Um,
I understand.
Sometimes it can feel like, okay, I get it. It's just going down the river.
Right.
So
What would you rate it out of 10?
out of 10, I feel like a strong 8.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's
Yeah,
that's enough.
a
I, I'm,
strong 8.
I'd read it then. Like if you're going to rate it an 8, I'd consider reading it.
Yeah,
Is it
you
is
should.
it a long book? It's a novella, right?
No, it's not a novel. It's a novel.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, so you might want to.
Yeah,
Yeah, you might want
and I think I'm
to.
just going to use this review, and that's going to be sufficient for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, look, here's if you're a fantasy, if you like fantasy, if you
yeah.
like vampires, I guess. But it doesn't. It's
Or
not a
Steamboat.
vampire story. If you like fantasy, this is a
Yeah.
good one.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Nice, dude. Mm, I think we had a great time. Thanks
Yeah.
for telling us about this book.
Yeah.
Uh,
My pleasure.
and maybe I think for the people listening, perhaps if you, because this is sort of improvisational, and this is just two friends discussing books that we read. We'd
Mhm.
appreciate if anyone left any comments on any ways to improve what it is that we're doing, or if there's any
Yeah.
book that you want us to specifically talk about. But bear in mind that we only really talk about it for like 40% of the time, and other times it's just
Random
random
stuff.
things that we're discussing. But know that if you want to know about the height, privilege, and politics of elves in the medieval time, this is definitely the only podcast that's discussing that.
Oh yeah, dude. By the way, we can have like an entire episode just talking
Let's
about
do
that.
it.
Dude, I'm down for that. I think I've read enough fantasy to get into it.
You know what? That's actually quite nice. I'd like that. Let's do it.
Really?
Yeah.
I think we can take actually the Witcher books. They have quite a bit as far as height politics or stereotypical, perceptions of dwarves and elves and whatnot going on. It's quite
What
a bit
I'll
of
do is,
racism.
if we do decide to do that, I'll make sure to read a couple as well, so just so I can play devil's advocate.
Oh yeah. They deserve those bastards now.
For next week, I was, as we mentioned that we'd be alternating books every week. So next week, I read this book recently. It's called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products.
Oh.
Yeah, by Near. It's actually quite interesting, and it's basically about how most of these companies these days, like how exactly do they ensure that you keep coming back for more, which is what we're hoping you all will do. This is a podcast about books, and we'll discuss all of them as much as we can. So let's see if nonfiction fares any better than today's fiction podcast.
Oh yeah, dude, let me tell you something, bro. Anything will fare better than this.
Maybe the self-deprecating humor.
We can get two dogs barking on the mic, and it would be more interesting.
Maybe if we can get some maybe this self-deprecating humor will gather a few people. All right, I guess that's it for us this time.
I guess that's it. Yeah, thank you, Mobeen. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
All right.